Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright. Today is March the 30th, 2009, and I'm here at Randolph-Macon College today with Louise Richards, Head of Technical Services Emeritus at the McGraw-Page Library. Ms. Richards, can you tell us how and when you came to work at Randolph-Macon College?
Well, my first library job after I left Syracuse University Library School in 1970 was at Alderman Library of the University of Virginia. After 3 years in the catalog department, I saw an advertisement for a head cataloger position at Randolph-Macon College in Ashland. I called and made an appointment with Flavia Owen, the director, for a Monday morning. On the Sunday before, I drove over to take a look and found that I liked the look of the college, the library, and the town. And when I came for the interview that day, I didn't mention my previous look-around. And I'll never know if she knew. Anyway, we talked a while, and then she took me to meet Academic Dean Howard Davis, who asked me about Wilson College, my undergraduate school. I told him it was Presbyterian and a small liberal arts women's college. He smiled and said that his wife had gone there. I was pleased with that. I also met President Luther Wright, and within a few days, they made me an offer. Okay.
Can you describe the library and your job when you first arrived?
Well, the Walter Hines Page Library was built in 1961, and it was a handsome building with 2 reading rooms on each side of the entrance. These reading rooms had double floor ceilings. In other words, they were very expansive. You looked up 2 stories. So I really loved them. And the reading rooms had a small balcony. Around the rooms at the beginning of the second-story level, I can remember one time when a student jumped off the balcony, and of course he broke his leg, but he was getting around on crutches fine soon, and he became a folk hero. The architect who was hired to make plans for the big expansion of the library after we got the McGraw grant, I made sure the architect knew very much that I wanted to keep those 2-story ceilings, and I got nowhere. We needed the space too badly. The catalog room in the old building was quite large. We had to have files for the shelf list, which is a file holding how each card is in the library. There were also cards for each C reference. We would have a C reference for chiropodist C podiatrist, or for the pseudonym of someone like Georges Sand, whose real name was Amandine Aurore Lucille Dupin. We would not have listed the book under that name for her sake. She was probably concerned that people would not read novels by a woman in those days, which was likely, and but certainly with a name like that, that could be the reason she didn't want to use it. When I came, there were 2 full-time people in the catalog office, myself and Francilla Grimes, who did all the typing and filing, and we had also 5 student assistants who worked part-time doing all kinds of things. We thought, well, I kind of upset people because they used to allow something called whiteout. I don't know whether you knew what whiteout was, because that was before we had word processors. And we had to, so people would use the whiteout, and it was like white paint, and then you could, when it dried, you could type in the proper number or whatever it was on the card that had to be changed. So they were very happy when we got an electric eraser. So they weren't as unhappy with me for requiring that it be erased. The problem was that the whiteout would rub off, and after a while you were back to the wrong thing that you were trying to correct. So with an eraser, we really got it in right. With the director of Flavia Owen, there were 5 of us. There was a circulation librarian who was by the name of Sarah Wright Jones. There was a cataloging librarian by the name of Mary Ruth Lancaster. She had gone to Randolph-Macon Women's College, as Flavia had, and Emory University, as Flavia had, for her library degree. In reference, we had Cecil Reed, who was also an alum. And with the library director, that made 5 of us. If you wanted to find a book in those days, you had to use the card catalog to find its Dewey number, which is the address of where it will be on the shelf. So you had to look it up by looking under the author's name. If the author used a pseudonym, that posed a problem, and we had the real name. So that's when we had put in the cross references. One time, Dr. Moreland, the retired president of the college, came to me and said, "The library has asked me to return a book by someone by the name of Bale, and I never had a book by that name." We asked him if he had a book by the name of, written by the name of Stendhal, and he said, "Of course." So we explained that that was the book we were looking for. That problem doesn't exist today because the computer has all the C references built in, and the cataloging information comes up to you for any of the pseudonyms. A great improvement.
Thank you, Louise. I think that problem would not occur today for another reason. I think we would probably let the president keep the book as long as he wanted.
We did have that rule, but apparently someone had asked for something, and we did used to call in books.
Yes.
Yes, I have to laugh because I remember at University of Virginia when someone from the faculty retired and he would give his books to the library. We sometimes got back books that he had charged out and never returned.
We've had the same thing happen where a faculty member has donated books and we discovered it was one of our own. Yes.
Okay, that's great.
You mentioned that the library had one of the first computers on campus. Can you describe how and when you first used computer technology in your work?
Well, very quickly, the faculty heard that we had a computer. A Kellogg grant, which brought us the computer, also provided us with membership in Solinet, our cataloging utility, and it provided us with a printer. Incidentally, it was large, 5 feet by 5 feet and 8 inches high. They had also sent us carpenter drawings for a desk that we would use for all the equipment that we would be using at our computer. Incidentally, our GE computer, which was 5 feet by 5 feet by 8 inches high, fit on it very nicely and had cost $3,000. And though noisy, we loved it. We had been sent these carpenter's drawings, and it fit just fine. With the computer attached, we had a database with bibliographic data. The printing and computer the printer fit on the left, and the computer and keyboard were in a slightly lower area on the desk, so we could do some writing down while we were working on the right side of the desk. Now, bibliographic data is a fancy phrase for book data, which was printed at the end of the faculty research papers. They were just delighted to be able to just give us a few letters of an author's name or a few words of the title, and we were able to print out and hand them just what they needed, which was the complete citation for every book they had used in their research, which is what's always found at the end of a paper.
Tell us about how and when the library catalog first became automated.
Well, my annual report from 1976 had that wonderful news that we had a Kellogg grant. It was used to pay, in part, the cost of entering Solinet, the cataloging utility, and the administration had then agreed to cover the rest. RMC would finally be online with all the other libraries, great and small, and for me, I would be able to learn the system. I had long thought I'd become a Neanderthal librarian. I'm interpreting the question about being online as being online with Solinet and OCLC. If you are referring to having the library catalog being able to be read by students and faculty on their own PCs in their own offices, even for me now, living 20 miles away, that did not happen till Elizabeth Suddeth, who took over my job when I retired in the summer of 1990. She had the big job of creating the software to manipulate the disks. We had about 35 that our department had created in MARC format, in other words, machine-readable format, in all the work we had done in when we had reclassified the entire collection. Yeah.
You mentioned that you were reclassifying. You made the transition from the Dewey Decimal classification to Library of Congress classification at the same time. Can you tell us about how that conversion took place?
I remember when I came to be interviewed for the job that Flavius said that the decision about the choice of a classification system would be mine to make. And I knew I would have to use Dewey for a while before I'd be able to make an informed decision. After a year, I saw problems developing with Dewey. First, that Dewey was having trouble in the area of technology, and the numbers were getting terribly long. That sounds silly, but in truth, the book spines just weren't wide enough to keep the numbers on one line. They were really long. And I also had to take into consideration that we would need to join the Solinet system as well as buy lots of new equipment. In other words, we needed money. So I told of my decision and left it with her. In the meantime, there were lots of things to do to get ready. First, we decided to do an inventory. We didn't want to be reclassifying and doing books that were moribund anyway. And I understood that school libraries always had to do an inventory, and perhaps even the state university libraries. Maybe not. It does sound very old-fashioned. There was a joke we were hearing that someone in the legislature had said, "Why do university libraries need money for books? I understand they haven't read all the ones they have already." Anyway, the inventory, along with a discard or repair program that we did at the same time, accomplished a lot of good things. First, and only one, we found one book that had been lost immediately after being cataloged. A 6 had been used on the spine number instead of a 9, which put it in an altogether different place. And I remember that I had cataloged it and had called up the person who had ordered it, and she went over to look for it and couldn't find it and never did. So that was a great thing to find.
Tell us about the work surrounding the library edition, which was completed in 1987.
I vaguely remember some of the planning for the time when the building process was actually going on so vigorously, when they're knocking down walls next to you, that both clients and staff had to get out. Some of the staff went over to a very large room in the science building where we could do our work there. Some people wanted, for instance, while that was going on, some people who wanted a particular book could ask for them from the people in that room, and library staff would deliver them to a place where the book could be picked up and checked out. The reference staff moved over a number of very useful reference books that they thought would be useful for them to use and for browsers who wanted to do their own searching. So that was available to people during that messy time. My memory is that a professional book moving group was contracted for the move back. The assumption being that the collection was now just too large to use the much remembered and favored bucket brigade that was so fondly remembered from the move from the old Carnegie Library. I would say that it's hard to remember a moving target, and this one kept moving fast. I managed to handle my disappointment that I would miss my 2-story ceilinged reading rooms. The library did need a lot more space. I had tried to convince the architect, but I did understand how much we needed the space.
Did librarians have faculty status and tenure when you were here?
Well, what Flavia wanted, Flavia got from the faculty. So we had faculty status. Her recommendation was always accepted. I felt I had to assert my faculty status by attending faculty meetings, which were at night. They were in Peel Hall on the 2nd floor, and they were late. They would sometimes go till 11 p.m. At that point, you were quite welcome to walk out. Some people would have walked out a bit earlier. I stayed till 11. It was a smoke-filled room, and there were cigars even. So it was something to do that. I've written up a statement to describe the requirements for faculty to receive tenure and have made the case that for catalogers, the requirement to publish, which is one that's pretty rough for many people, but that they really fulfilled the requirement to publish by doing original cataloging. Now, original cataloging is cataloging for which there is no other record published in anything. You know, Solinet, OCLC. It's essentially either not been done yet or something. Anyway, that is original. And original then is for any publishing has to be submitted to peer review. And it's interesting that when it's published in the Solinet database and submitted, those two cataloging utilities have to be, well, let me see. Incidentally, at that point, our symbol is added to the record, which commits us to that cataloging. If we have an error in it, we would be told. We would be told about that. So, anyway, it was really something to be in that smoke-filled room with the cigars. I won't say who was doing that. Anyway, we really have a good case for that to be our publishing.
Tell us about your involvement in college activities outside of the library.
Well, I enjoyed several outside the library. A favorite was the Gourmet Group. It was made up of faculty and staff couples. It was voluntary, of course, or single faculty could take a partner. I partnered with Peggy Alexander of the computer department, and Jim Scanlon partnered with Donna Bennington of the Spanish department. The chairman decided on the cuisine, and we would use for each of 4 dinner parties. They would also break up the list into groups of 4 participants and assign to each person who was to bring the main entry, which was the place where we would meet to have our party. They would assign 4 different categories of things to bring. There was appetizer, and then there was salad and bread, and then there was dessert, and finally the main entry, and that was for the person who had it at their home. I remember one time when we were doing a Chinese cuisine, and we had the job of salad and bread. So I remember making the bread, and it was, we made yeast rolls, and they were really just like any other roll, except that we steamed them instead of baking them. And it was just, we made this yeast dough, and it was like a little piece of rope tied, and instead of baking them, they had to be steamed. They tasted just like normal baked bread, but were very white, a ghostly white. The group lasted for 17 years, with various membership at the time. It began shortly before 1980 and lasted through 1997. Membership at times included President Liddell Payne, academic deans Garris and Davis and their wives, the Bedsouls, the Bennington Scanlon group, the Hesses, the Noes, the Suddeths, the Schuyler Millers, the Spagnas, the Longacres, the Hilliards, the Ungers, and my partner, Peggy Alexander. It was a great way to know the faculty and staff. Now and then, we would also go for the very last meeting, after we'd had our 4 parties, we would go to an ethnic restaurant where somebody else did all the work, and we went all together as a big group. That was extra fun. That year, in 1974, the same year, they organized a book group, and it is still going on. It began with mentoring by Sue Watson, Richie Watson's wife. Sue had a degree in English, but after a few years, she was appointed to the county school board by Nina Peace. We were really in pretty successful politics in town at that time, because Nina Peace was elected to the County Board of Supervisors. And her husband taught at Randolph-Macon's in Randolph-Macon's mathematics department. Sue soon got too busy to continue book group, and we had to run it ourselves. So we're doing it. We try to choose shorter texts for around Christmas and long ones to do over the summer. This year we did the Follett's book, The Pillars of the Earth, for summer. And that was because it was just under 1,000 pages. Then the very short one that we could use for Christmas was about 2 slave narratives written by the slaves themselves, which was unusual because most of them had not had an opportunity to learn how to read and write because it was denied them. The slaves were John Washington, who lived from 1838 to 1918, and Wallace Turnage, who lived from 1846 to 1916. To me, that sounds relatively recent, but that's because I was born in 1923. Members from the past who are still in the group today include Elizabeth Davis, wife of deceased academic dean Howard, and Beverly Shea, wife of deceased professor of botany Russell. Mary Beth Raboon, wife of Professor John, and Sylvia Spagna, wife of the professor of physics George, and Elizabeth Schutte, sister of professor of English Bill McElwain, and me. There are also a few other more recent members.
We are interested in hearing about Flavia Owen. I would be very interested to hear about her strengths as a librarian from someone who worked directly with her, and any other memories that you might have about Flavia.
Well, when Flavia first came, she was actually she was enrolled in the summer session of Emory University Library School. She already had her BA degree from Randolph-Macon Women's College in Roanoke. The Carnegie Library, where Flavia came to work, was about 1/3 the size of the building that is now enlarged and named Peel Hall. The old Carnegie Library was incredibly inconvenient and inefficient. She would know from the start that a new library must be built, and quickly. This was the situation in the 1950s. She threw herself into fundraising from the start and proved to be very successful in many campaigns after that. When I knew her, she worked closely with Bill Gibson, who was an alumnus, an ordained minister of the United Methodist Church, and for a time was chaplain of the college. He too worked very successfully with the development office. Flavia also saw her job as working with development. She knew every alum. She was a very sophisticated cook and entertained on any excuse for a celebration. Her husband Ted was also an alum and equally interested in the success of the college. On occasions, when the college would award an honorary degree, Flavia was often asked to compose the citation or perhaps the recipient's response. At the time of the campaign for the enlargement of Walter Hines-Page Library to become the McGraw-Page the McGraw-Page Library, she was very close to Mrs. McGraw and family as long as she lived. Even Flavia's typing was legendary. She was fast, accurate, and used an ordinary manual typewriter. Occasionally, she typed a thesis for a faculty PhD candidate. And she typed her obligatory annual paper for the famous Women's Club of Ashland, with no apparent revisions. Perhaps she did have an outline, but it seemed effortless to this member of that club. Flavia's office was lined with bookcases where she shelved publishers' catalogs in alphabetical order. Most small libraries just use jobbers lists where one can check off what is wanted. For her, when the faculty submitted their requests, she put orders in the mail herself. Whenever a professor died, she would set up a named fund for him or her and write a personal letter to inform faculty and alums of the news. Many alums and other faculty are pleased to add to the endowment for such funds.
Did you have much interactions with students in your work at Randolph-Macon?
I got to know the students in the catalog department well, and now that I think of it, I knew lots of the circulation department kids too. And there is one I still keep track of, one who married a student. Okay.
Can you describe the student and campus life as you saw it during the 1970s and 80s?
Well, I came to a completely Dewey library, Dewey subject headings and all, and I left it just as completely a Library of Congress library. Very much changed. Classification, subject heading, and all of the cards were filed back in the card catalog, and the books were reshelved. And now, by other hands, transformed to a catalog I can use myself from my retirement home, and the faculty can do so from their offices without coming into the library at all. The job I left for Elizabeth Suddeth, for Elizabeth Suddeth, who replaced me, and I was glad to leave that one for her.
Thank you, Louise Richards, for participating in Making Memories today.
Okay, and all I'd want to add is that it was a very pleasant experience.